Welcome to Storytime Fun, boys and girls. We hope you enjoy. And today's story is out of the Walt Disney Storyland book. And it's called Ben and Me. From the motion picture Ben and Me, based on the book by Robert Lawson. If you should ever visit the fair city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, very likely you will see a fine statue to the memory of Benjamin Franklin. He was one of our country's first great leaders. Benjamin Franklin was a philosopher, an inventor, and a patriot. If you are fortunate enough to have a good view of the crown of the statue's broad-brimmed hat, you may see there a tiny statue to one of our country's unsung great, a chap by the name of Amos Mouse. It was Amos, you see, who was really responsible for many of the great deeds credited to Franklin. And here is the story in his own words. I was born and raised in Philadelphia in the old church on 2nd Street. Our home was in the vestry behind the paneling. There were 26 children in the family. With that many mouths to feed, we were naturally poor. In fact, we were as poor as church mice. Since I was the oldest, I decided to set out into the world and make my own way. If I were successful, I could help the others. But in any case, it was one less mouth to feed. It was the winter of 1745. Those were difficult times. Jobs were scarce, especially for a mouse. All day I tramped through the snow, dodging icicles, brooms, and cats. By nightfall, I did not know where to turn. If I didn't find shelter soon, I'd be done for. My last hope was an old run-down shop out near the edge of town. A sign just over the door read, Benjamin Franklin, printer and bookbinder. Somehow that sounded promising, so I found my way inside. The place was full of strange contraptions, brass rods, tangles of wire and such. It was about as cold inside as it was outside. Back in the shadows sat a round-faced man trying to write by candlelight. As I watched the little man, he began to shiver with cold. Then he came a mighty sneeze. Achoo! Off flew his glasses, and they crashed onto the floor. "Oh, dear, don't tell me," cried the little man. "My last pair. Now what will I do? I'll never get my paper out, and if I don't pay my rent in 24 hours, the men I owe money to will take my press and my furniture and throw me out." 24 hours? I said thoughtfully. It isn't much. "It's hopeless," said the little man. "But you can't give up," I told him. "Nothing ventured, nothing gained, Mr. Franklin." "My name's Ben," he said. "Plain Ben. And what would you do, whatever your name is?" "My name is Amos," I told him. "One of the church mice from over on 2nd Street. And the first thing I'd do is figure out a way to heat this place." I suggested a firebox in the middle of the room so the heat didn't all go up the chimney. Of course, it had to be made of iron with a pipe to the chimney to carry off the smoke. It sure wasn't much to look at when he got it made, but it works, Amos, he had to admit. Say, I wonder if we couldn't make these and sell them. Call them Franklin stoves. If you know your history, of course, you know they did make those stoves. Well, while Ben had been fooling around with the stove, I'd been at work on his eyeglasses. I'd been working on them. He'd broken both of them outdoors in his reading pair. The only thing left was to make one pair out of the two of them, fitting the glasses together as I could. Will they do? I asked Ben Franklin when he tried them on. Will they do? He echoed. Why, Amos, they're great! Two-way glasses! By George! Bifocals, we'll call them. And to my surprise, they became famous too, even more so than the Franklin stoves. We were ready then to get to work on the paper. When I took a look at it, I found it really needed work. Poor Richard's Almanac, it was called. Poor indeed, I thought. There really wasn't any bit of news in the whole sheet. What would you suggest? Ben said. Well, first, I'd give it a new name, something snappy like, the Gazette, the Pennsylvania Gazette. That's what I'd call it. Then I'd give them some news, real news. But where will I get news at this hour? Ben Franklin wanted to know. So, of course, I had to go out and get it for him. I found a big fire on Chestnut Street. I came upon some fellas plotting to cheat the city. I filled my pocket notebook full of news. Then I raced back to Benjamin Franklin and helped him set the story of the fire and the plot to cheat the city in type and print off the sheets on his hand printing press. It was a long night's work, but I'm here to state it was worth it. By evening of the next day, everyone in Philadelphia was reading the Gazette. Ben Franklin was a success. From then on, I went everywhere with Ben, riding conveniently on his hat so I could lean down and give him some pointers now and then. Well, the years went by quickly, and Ben's reputation grew. Letters poured in from all over the colonies, asking Ben's advice on all kinds of things. It took most of my spare time to answer them. Meanwhile, Ben was puttering around with his experiments, and it was one of them that led us at last to the parting of our ways. Ben took up kite flying. That was the beginning and to the framework of his largest kite. He had fastened a small box just for me. I was so thrilled by flying, seeing the whole countryside spread out like a storybook below, that I failed to notice a sharp, pointed wire fastened to the kite. The first hint I had that anything was a little dangerous was when the kite darkened with thunder clouds, yikes, and a mean rain wind blew and blew. The kite spun and shivered, but Ben would not pull me in. I screamed myself hoarse. I tugged at the rope. Now lightning was flashing along the horizon. Thunder rolled. The storm was moving our way. Suddenly, with a blast that seemed to split the world, lightning struck my kite. The shock went through me and almost tore the kite to ribbons. I thought my end would surely come now. Too late. Ben began to wind his rope. The kite and I, in tatters both, came staggering down the wind and landed in a tree. When Ben found us there, he scooped me up in one hand. "Amos, Amos, speak to me," he cried. And I could almost forgive him for what I had suffered. He seemed so deeply upset. Shakily, I managed to open one eye. "Amos," he cried again. Was it electricity? I had been the victim of a plot. All he cared about was whether or not the sizzle in the lightning bolt was the same as electricity. That was the end of it for me. "Goodbye," I said, and though he pleaded with me to change my mind, I left Ben then and went back to my family. The years that followed were troubled ones. Restless crowds filled the streets. There were riots and loud talk against the stamp tax and other outrages of the king. It was during this crisis that Ben was chosen to go to England and lay our case before the king. The colonies eagerly awaited his return, but Ben's mission was a failure. The king would not listen. It seemed as if war must surely come, but the people had no clear statement of their cause to hold them together through a long, bitter fight. Poor old Ben was worried. I couldn't help feeling sorry for the little man. It was a heavy responsibility he had, more than he could carry. I could help him. I knew I could, but no, I could not go back to work for Benjamin Franklin. After all, a mouse has his pride. One night in the summer of 1776, I was awakened by a voice calling my name. Who could it be at that hour, I wondered. Sleepily, I staggered out of bed and through the mouse hole in the vestry paneling. There on his knees was the great man, Ben Franklin himself. "Amos, I've come to ask you to come back," he said as humbly as you please. I was pleased and touched, but I could not let him see it. "Out of the question," I said and turned to go. "Please, Amos, consider your country," he begged. "I have many big decisions to make, and I can't make them alone. You just must come back, Amos." "On my own terms?" I asked. "If I draw up an agreement, will you sign it?" "I'll sign it, Amos. I'll sign any agreement you draw up," he vowed. So I went back, having spent the night writing out our agreement by candlelight. Ben was glad to see me the next morning, you may be sure. He took my hat and coat. He made me some tea, but I was not to be put off my course. I gave him at once my agreement to sign. "Oh, of course, he said. "Do you mind if I read it?" "If you wish," I said. That was when the knocking came at the door. It was Thomas Jefferson, Red, Ben called him. And he was in a terrible state. You see, he was one of the leaders of the colonies too, and he was supposed to write for them all the statement of what they believed, a Declaration of Independence, you might say. But he could not get the beginning right, struggle as he would. The time has come when we, the people of these colonies, he began to read. But then he broke off and shook his head. No, Ben, it isn't right. The time is at hand. No. Psst, Ben, I said when I saw how upset the poor Thomas Jefferson was. How about our contract? Shh, said Ben. Just a minute. No, I insisted. Now. So Ben got out his magnifying glass and began to read it aloud. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary... Ben, cried Red Jefferson, perking up. That's it. So that's how it happened that I supplied the beginning for the Declaration of Independence. Oh, I didn't get public credit, of course, but fame doesn't matter to a mouse. I have my memories, wonderful ones, of the good old days and Ben and me. Well, that's it for today. We'll see you next time.